Oh, I think we're live. We've been live for a little bit. Why do I always not pay attention sometimes when the live starts? I have that as a bad habit. Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I just got a message from Belle letting me know that she is not going to be able to make it. And so you guys are stuck with me and here with me for today, which is great because I feel as though it confirms a story that I want to tell, and I feel like I would have to tell it kind of on my own. So welcome you guys to the Life Matters podcast, and you are here with me today, Keyonna Monroe. I'm an NLP practitioner and counselor and emotional intelligence coach. And today we are talking about domestic violence awareness. That for me is something very near and dear to my heart for, for my own reasons, right? But I always see that, there are a lot of unseen wounds in regards to domestic violence and the trauma that is within from that. And it's a harsh reality that a lot of people deal with, and it doesn't matter, gender, age, socioeconomic status, it doesn't matter. And it's a trauma that, not only leaves scars on the body, but more insidiously, it leaves scars on the heart and on the spirit, and a lot of times in the psyche as well, and trying to figure out the understanding of domestic violence is heavy, and it has a lot to do with not just the physical violence. Like I said before, it can be emotional violence and emotional abuse, psychological violent abuse, and even economic abuse, right? And I always think that it's the most violated of our most sacred spaces that we hold dear, which is right in the center of our being. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experience that I dealt with in 2018 that I never really talked about it with anybody. Not really, not too publicly, because for me it was during a time where I felt like I was excelling and I was doing great in my career and with the work that I do. I just kind of buried it because I carried like a cloud of shame, because I blamed myself a little bit of, how I put myself in a situation that caused me, harm, right? And most of the time, trying to understand the mindset of an abuser and the people who are on the opposite side of that, trying to figure that out on your own sometimes can be very, very harsh. And then trying to understand why people stay essentially is also very harsh. We tend to judge and critique people's decisions and choices. And I know that many survivors stay in relationships or have stayed in relationships with an abuser to protect their children. Sometimes they feel like it's easier to stay and it might be safer to stay than leaving. A lot of times the abuser may alternate between moments of extreme violence and apparent remorse, creating this cycle of confusing hope and despair and need. And then a sense of survival, like I can't really live without them. And then fear of retaliation, social stigma and lack of support systems can also contribute to some reasons why people stay. But from my own kind of personal experience, one of the reasons that I kind of got into the situation that I'm in, with the work that I do as a healer, I sometimes have the tendency to feel like, because I went through what I went through, and because I was able to go through the healing process, and I was maybe like 6 or 7 years into my organization. I had been doing therapy for years and years and years. And so I met someone, who I felt was able to see me, and at that time, accept me in ways that I felt were gonna be unacceptable in life. Um, and I felt like he understood a lot of what I went through because culturally, he was Black and Latin, I'm Black and Latin, and I was just like, "Oh, okay, this is," there's so many things that he'll be able to understand. And for a long time, I looked at myself, because of the things that I went through, I looked at myself as damaged. I looked at me as damaged. And when I started to heal, um, I still had some parts that I felt like, I healed in a lot of other places, but I still have, you know, some residue, maybe damaged residue. And I mean, when I really think about it, I think about all the signs I didn't pay attention to and the boundaries that I didn't set, right? But I didn't know better at that time, so I didn't do better, um, to a degree when it came to that, right? I didn't know the importance of really setting boundaries with someone that I was in a relationship with. I knew, because of therapy, to start setting boundaries like with my family, right? I knew to set boundaries with maybe the friends that I had, maybe just some people that I grew up around, but I didn't really think about setting boundaries in a relationship at that time, and that's not something that I necessarily tackled at that time. And I didn't set enough boundaries for him. I didn't realize what I had the capacity to tolerate, that would not compromise um, myself. I did not realize, you know, the importance of not loving and supporting and caring someone at the expense of yourself. I didn't realize that, you know, you can walk alongside of someone's healing journey, but it is not your responsibility to fix them. They are not a project. They are not, your clients if you are a healer, and they are not your children. It's not your job to parent them, right? You can gently guide them and walk alongside and be supportive and create a safe emotional space and container. But it is not your job to figure them out and help them heal at the expense of yourself. And that is what I did. I gave excuses to this person, and I gave reasons for, I gave excuses, and to me, justifiable reasons. And I did this because I felt like, for so long I didn't get grace. And one of the trauma triggers that I have, just a little bit, or maybe a coping mechanism that I do. Um, when I was younger, I wasn't always extended a lot of grace. I wasn't allowed to make mistakes. And when I made mistakes, love was taken away as a punishment, right? So that gave me abandonment issues. But it also made me tell myself, when I see that someone is trying, right, that I allow them grace to make mistakes because they have to learn, and it is a process. However, what I did not do, like I said, is set boundaries to protect myself. And I didn't set certain limitations of what I will and won't accept in a relationship. So every time he gave me some type of bad behavior, I felt like if he could just, he's a good person. He had a lot of good characteristics. He was very accepting to all of my stuff. Like, my stuff didn't scare him. My stuff didn't freak him out in any way, shape, or form. And so because of that, I was like, oh, but well, if all he has to do is heal, I can help him do that. He's got so many other great qualities in terms of, certain things. But like, one of the other things I didn't realize is um, what my deal breakers were and what my non-negotiables were. I have a non-negotiable with people who are consistently drinking, right? So when I recognized that that's something that he did, and he would do it to mask pain, he would do it when hard emotions came up, and he would try to suppress those emotions with the alcohol. And then I would notice he would behave differently. Um, And so I paid attention to that and I didn't say anything about that. I just brushed it off. Um, and then another thing that I noticed is that, he was easily irritated, quick-tempered. He would project a whole lot. He was impulsive, always emotionally charged, and didn't know how to manage and regulate his emotions. He didn't take responsibility all the time for the behaviors that were harmful. And when I say harmful, he would verbally be abusive and he would lash out. So those are the verbal and psychological things. He would be emotionally manipulative and abusive, saying some things and then turning around and apologize. But I didn't recognize at that time he would do it without change behavior. And I did not hold him to a behavior that I felt was acceptable. I didn't do that. Right. So these are the things that I learned, and these are the mistakes that I made in my own personal experience. And one of the things is I allowed maybe my sympathy and my empathy for his story to dictate um, my capacity to, I guess, absorb the negativity that he was bringing into my life. So I remember, um, I remember there was a time when he got really, really, really drunk, and I should have looked at that as a sign, and I did not. Um, but he got really drunk, and he drunk called me, and he didn't remember drunk calling me and all of the things that he said. And what I realized is that he shared a lot of hurt. He shared a lot of pain. He shared a lot of childhood trauma that he had endured and that he went through when he was a child from having an abusive father. And then he shared with me that when he was I think he was maybe 9 or 10 years old, um, he was in the same household and of earshot to, unfortunately, hearing his mother being raped. And that he didn't understand exactly what was happening, but he knew something bad was happening. And it's something that he never dealt with. It's something that he never really talked about. Um, and and out of that, right? He never shared any of that with his mother, but he had a lot of resentment towards her. And one of the things I also did not notice, and it was also a red flag that I didn't pay attention to, because again, constantly thinking that I am a healer and that if I could just get this person into therapy, everything would be okay. And he would be okay. And then he would be better for me. And then he would be better for himself, overall being better for the relationship. And that was not my responsibility. Those were actually the red flags that I was not paying attention to at the time, and that I needed to pay attention to. And I put myself in the line of fire, and I shared a lot of, I didn't realize that he was not the right emotional container to be vulnerable with, right? There was not enough emotional safety to be that. And so I was giving somebody, ways to hurt and harm me without realizing that that's not the right person to do it to. And I'm putting my own emotional safety in harm, and psychological safety in harm, let alone my physical safety in harm's way. And y'all bear with me, because this really is the first time I've ever talked about it publicly. I remember I remember when I shared with him some really deep details about some of the things that bothered me and things that hurt me and harmed me growing up. And again, he did not remember sharing all the information. And when I told him what he told me, he was upset with himself that he shared that information. But also he was upset with me for actually listening to it. So he actually took that out on me and was like cursing me out. But I took that as he doesn't mean it. It's just he's in pain. He might be embarrassed. And again, still trying to lead him to go to therapy instead of looking at as a red flag and leaving. And the situation with his mom when he was a child, he didn't realize that at that time, he was thinking about, he had fetishes and certain things that he would want to do intimately that he didn't realize was connected to what he experienced when he was a child, um, as a witness to what happened to his mother. And so meeting someone like me with a history of sexual assault, right? I realize now that it was a trauma bond. And I also realized that, I was in it trying to be a healer and a fixer because I was still not ready to deal with some of my parental um, childhood wounds, right? And so by trying to heal him and fix him and thinking that that healing and fixing will be what's necessary in order for him to love me, um, sorry, those are the boats outside. Then that was my way of trying to figure out me doing that with my parents and not getting love from them. And if I felt like if I could fix and heal them, or I couldn't fix and heal them so that I can get love from them, but I could at least fix this guy, right? And fix him and heal him, and then he can love me. And not realizing that I was putting myself in a situation where I was being abused mentally and emotionally. And I kept saying, okay, at least I said this to myself, that I think this is as far as he would go. And this is something that I can endure, not realizing that I have been conditioned my whole life to endure, right? And to be abused in a lot of different ways. But I thought at that time, well, he's not physically assaulting me, right? He's not physically harming me. He's just mentally and emotionally harming me. And that is something I can heal from. I'm in therapy. I can heal from that. And if I help him heal from that, then he won't do that to me, right? All the stories and all the excuses and all the justifications and the romanticizing that I did for him. And then with the work that I do, having a heart for people who have gone through things and not write them off and not believe them, and understand that healing is a right. Therapy is a right for other people. And even if it's not in their culture, the cultural and societal norm back then was, therapy, don't go to therapy. And so, that's where his mindset was. And I just felt if I can guide him along, then he'll be able to do it. And what I realize now is what he would do is romanticize my sexual assault from the assault that he heard his mother go through. And that actually aroused him. And he shared that with me when he was drunk. And like thinking about, every time I think about that, it makes me very sad. But it also made me wise of making sure people have earned the right to your sensitive stories, to the delicate, gentle parts of you. People have to earn the access to be in those spaces with you and to share something as sensitive as my assault stories and some of the experiences that I went through when I was trafficked as a child, to be in a relationship with someone who looked at those stories and was aroused by those stories, right? And was sexually turned on by my pain because he couldn't understand what he experienced with his mother when he was a child, because one of the things he shared was that it aroused him. And he didn't realize that as a 9, 10-year-old boy, what his body was doing, what those feelings were, but none of that. He had no idea what any of that was, right? And he didn't realize that his arousal to me sharing details of my story was directly tied to some of the things he experienced when he was a child, right? And that's actually something he needed to get literal therapy and psychiatric care and help and support with processing that and healing those wounds, right? Because he was a child. Instead of doing that, he would drink. And I made excuses, right? Because again, I made mistakes and I was written off for my mistakes. And so I try to give people a lot of the benefit of the doubt and a lot of grace and room and not write them off when they make a mistake. But they have to be willing to do their own work, right? I believe that second chances are for redemption, not repetition. There has to be changed behavior, and a lot of times people who are very abusive, they say a lot of verbal things. They make a lot of promises and commitments that they don't keep, or they keep sometimes, but they still don't do the work that's necessary for them to heal in ways that will not put you in harm's way, that their behavioral habits will change, that their mindset will start to be healed so that they see things differently and they do things differently. And it is not at your mental, emotional, and physical expense, right? And unfortunately, a lot of people feel like they are entitled to access to you. And if they have experienced certain things, and here's another thing, I just felt like, well, because I've shared so much and he's still around, he didn't leave me. I shared things that would make anybody head to the hills. Cam, exactly. Very much so. Exactly. I shared things with him that I thought it would make any man run. Because he didn't run, I looked at that like, oh, well, he deserves some support. He deserves some help. He's not running from me, so why would I run from him? Right? But it's two completely different things. And I did not know at that time. And when I realized after he shared that he was getting aroused, when during some times and on his own, he would drink and get drunk and his mind would go directly to what arouses him about me. And that is a sickness that needs healing. If anybody is aroused by you telling them about your sexual assault and things that happened to you, that is not somebody that you are responsible for fixing and healing. And I didn't realize that at that time. But I did say, I can't be with you, right? And what he did was say, okay, I'll go to therapy. I don't want you to leave me. I realize that this is a sickness, right? The words, the verbal. I will fix it. I'll go to therapy. And what I said was, you can't drink and go to therapy because a lot of emotions are going to surface, and alcohol and those feelings that will be brought to the surface, they don't mix well, right? Me in my mind, I was just like, I know those don't sit well. I know how he is when he gets really, really drunk. And the last thing I want is for a therapist to dig up emotions that he already runs from and tries to drink away. So if you add alcohol to things that have been pulled from deep, deep, deep within, who knows how he's going to respond to that, right? And sometimes you get a still small voice, you get a whisper, you get a something. It's your gut. You know what that is that tells you, you know, if you need to leave before you get into a situation that is going to be worse for you, right? And that's exactly what happened to me. He went to therapy and then he said, I was out of town at the time. And I said, don't drink. And he said, can I go to your house when therapy is over? When I said at that time, I believe we were not living together, but living together. We shared a home together in another place, but then I still went back and forth and kind of lived in LA, and he still went back and forth, living where he was on the East Coast. And so I said, sure, just don't drink. And we can go if you want, you can talk to me about your session, or you don't have to talk to me about it. You can journal, and I will just give you whatever support, you might need at the time. And I didn't listen to the voice. And a part of the voice said, don't go back home. Don't go back there. And I did anyway. And I just said, if I go really, really late, and if I delayed a little bit, I flew back into town and it was already late. And I decided to kill a little bit extra time, and he was awake. And when I went to my house, there were Corona bottles everywhere, wine bottles everywhere. And I mean, it looked like he threw a party. It was like a full bar, and everything had been drunken, right? There was wine on the carpet. And I was like, what in the world? And there's a wave that came over me, like where the hairs on my neck stood up. And I was just like, I'm not safe, right? And I've been in a lot of positions with the trafficking experiences that I've experienced in my life, and all of the things that I've dealt with in my life. And I know when I'm walking into something that's going to be harmful. And so I tried to just bypass it. Eyes were red. His eyes were red. Like his skin was like dewy. It seemed like alcohol was coming out of his pores. And he wasn't himself. And I tried to go around it and just say, I'm really tired. I'm so sleepy. Why are you still up? I'm going to go to bed. Trying to make all these reasons of why I needed to go to sleep. And he would not allow me to go to bed. He wanted to talk. He thought because I wanted to go to bed is because I cheated. He was giving me all these reasons. And when he asked for a hug, and I said, I don't want a hug right now. I want to change. I've been on an airplane and I just want to get settled in. And that was taken for him as rejection. And it was a wrap after that. He's probably, with a lot of things that I've endured, I've never been in a relationship where I have been beaten really, really badly. And I did not stay. I called the police. He went to jail, and I left, right? And that was the end. I didn't stay. And, my heart goes out to those who stay for the reasons that they stay. And there's no judgment, because I stayed when there was psychological, spiritual, and emotional abuse. And I shamed myself because I felt like I should have known better and I didn't do better. And that I should have looked at the signs of, if he can abuse you verbally, right? He can abuse you mentally, if he can abuse you emotionally. If you stay around long enough, he could very well possibly abuse you physically and assault you physically. And I think that, he trashed the house. He flipped over tables. He took all the glasses out of the cabinets and just threw them everywhere, plates, everything. He took my computer that I do all my work with and trashed it. He picked up a Bible and hit me across the face with it, because I would always try to get him to be closer to God. So that, like, he was trying to do anything to hurt and harm me. I was strangled. I was thrown across the room. I was beat pretty bad. And at that time, I think he was trying to do additional harm, because he also knew that at that time I had just found out that I had breast cancer, and I had to go and get the lump removed and have my surgery. And by going through what I went through, and then having to go to the hospital, when I did the MRIs to see if they wanted to see if I had any internal damage, they put iodine in my system so that things couldn't show up in the x-rays and in the MRIs. And so that kept me from, I had to push my surgery back, because I had that in my system, and I couldn't have that and anesthesia in my system at the same time from what I was told. And so, you know, that is my very first experience of being with somebody and making excuses and justifying their behaviors and feeling like you can heal and fix them, even if they're putting you in harm's way emotionally and verbally. Harm is harm, and abuse is abuse. And it's something that I will never get. I hide. I was so embarrassed, because I'm just thinking, here I am. I have this organization. I'm telling everybody to love themselves first. I'm teaching self-love. I'm teaching healing and all of this stuff. And I put myself in a situation to be hurt, trying to heal and fix someone whose brokenness was not my responsibility, right? And I didn't see that, and it was a very hard year and some change that I was with him. And it was also something that um also at the time, uh I was pregnant and I miscarried and I lost um, my daughter. And it's something that, I'd never talked about either. And not something that I processed at that time as well. Um, and I just feel like I lost myself, but I couldn't unravel and I couldn't fall apart because I had a 16-year-old. I had a 15-year-old. He was 15 at the time. Um, but I had a kid. So, there's no way that I could unravel. And I had, all these young girls and all these other people that I felt like I was responsible for being able to show up for. So, um, you know, I just kind of pushed it down and I dealt with it in therapy, but I carried a lot of shame from that. And that's my experience that was my first domestic violence experience in a relationship, right? So domestic violence awareness, pulling that back in, is it's not just about acknowledging the existence to it, it's actually a call to action. And I think that it is a plea for our society that refuses um, to pay attention the way they should pay attention, and we have the tendency to turn a blind eye to the suffering of others, right? I think that domestic violence awareness is like the demand for legal reforms and increase the resources for those who are going through it, and then to also allow a level of comprehensive education to prevent domestic violence and to be more supportive of the survivors, right? And that awareness has to go beyond the extent of just recognizing the signs, but it has to be a call to action, and it has to kind of involve changing the norms, societal norms and attitudes that perpetuate like a culture of violence, especially violence towards women, and not just women, because men go through that type of abuse as well. We all go through those things. It doesn't, like I said in the beginning, it doesn't matter your economic status and your gender or your ethnicity or your nationality. That does not matter. It can happen to everybody. And I think that, domestic violence awareness, it requires us, to teach our children, which is why I do the work that I do, it to teach our children and our young people about healthy relationships, right? About consent, about respect, and do it from a young age, right? This is another reason why I teach emotional intelligence, how to manage and regulate your emotions, right? And how to identify them so that you can learn how to verbalize them, communicate them in a healthy way, process them, right? be responsible for your participation in what it is that you are feeling, right? We need to understand, especially our society, we need to call people out and create empathy, not judgment or shame, not blame, right? And hold people accountable for their actions, right? Because violence in your relationship and violence in the home, it requires us to address roots, the root causes of all of that, of misogyny, of patriarchy, of like toxic power dynamics that breed abuse, um, and and the pain, the conditioned um, programming of pain and culture, and how that is also very, very harming, right? Um, I think that the awareness for this month, and that what you can keep in mind, right, is to confront persuasive trauma, right, that hurts survivors, and understand the reasons why people do what they do. Pay attention to you. Do your mirror work and see, what am I doing? Are any of my behaviors and actions and words hurtful and harmful? When I see something, say something, right? And find ways to create containers of safety for other people to be vulnerable enough and transparent enough to be forthcoming with what it is that what they're going through, because it takes a community and a village, and no one can go through these things by themselves, and we should have to, right? Everyone deserves the right to be believed and heard and safe and loved and cared for and protected out of harm's way. And harm, not just physical harm, but harm psychological, spiritual, verbal, and emotional. It's a journey, right, of healing that we all need, right, to be a better society where love is defined by respect and compassion and safety, and where our wounds of the past can heal, and the cycle of brokenness, gets repaired and healed for future generations, so that our kids don't have to go through that if they don't need to. And domestic violence is something that most people have experienced in some way, shape, or form, or know someone who's experienced it, or have seen it. We've seen it. There's a lot of violence in television and in the media of what we watch. And there's a lot of violence against women. And we cannot be desensitized to that. And that cannot be the norm, right? And I took that experience that I went through. I lost more than I had to. And I allowed someone to put scars on my heart and my spirit, right? Because I looked at myself as a fixer and a healer, right? But now I realize it's not my responsibility. And had I shared some things, right, and not shamed myself into silence, and blamed myself, and made the stories and the conversations that I had with myself, to myself and with others, to try to protect him. And I wasn't very vocal when it came to the things that I was dealing with. I dealt with a lot of that stuff behind closed doors. So I think that when you have people in your life, ask questions without being invasive, but create safety, so that they know if something gets really hard, they can come and talk to you. They can share those things, right? There's something that I call primary love that's very, very important. And primary love is creating a safe space for people to be authentically themselves, and to be willing to be transparent and forthcoming and vulnerable and honest about what they are experiencing. And you can do that by creating a safe space for them to do that. You can vocalize that You can say things like, I want you to know that I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to listen. I might not understand or be able to, or I might not be able to relate, right? But I can be present, and you can be believed in my presence. You can be believed and supported, right? And the mistakes that you feel like you're making by staying in something that might be harmful to you, right? That is not something that I'm going to open fire and shoot judgment in condemnation, right? It is my way to support you and let you know that you don't have to have this experience by yourself. And let's figure out a way to problem solve together, and that I'm here to walk alongside of you while you go through whatever it is that you go through, that you need to go through to put yourself in a safer position. And it took a lot of therapy, to heal from that. Benetta, thanks for sharing your story. Thank you. Thank you guys for even listening to this. This was very hard for me to share between domestic violence. Yeah, this was hard for me to share it because it's not something that I've shared publicly. My miscarriage is something that still to this day weighs very heavy, especially now I'm 41 years old and I can't have children. It's just very, that's something very, very heavy to lose my daughter, 5 months to miscarry. So because of what was done to my body, that she didn't survive it. And it's a learning experience. It is a learning experience. And so I thank you guys for allowing a safe space for me to share this with you. And I hope that everyone who watches it, whether it's now or whenever, because this will be saved so you can replay it and watch. I hope and I pray that that you look at the things that I went through and the things that I experienced and the things that I tolerated and allowed to be of guidance to you, that you don't do the things that I did, and to pay attention to that and understand that you deserve more than being in a relationship with somebody that only requires fixing and pouring and doesn't have the capacity and the personal development work within themselves to be able to pour back into you without causing you any type of harm or pain that is undeserved. You don't deserve. You will never, nothing that you do deserves abuse ever, ever, ever in life, ever. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to go on that note. I love you all so much. And remember, you have to make loving yourself first matter. Until next time, guys. I love you all. Thank you.